Hi all. Sorry for not being on camera. I'm on the move right now, but uh, my name is Erin Kerrigan from the Community Engagement Team. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this special webinar on background checks. So I believe either Matt or Meryl is going to lead us off. So I'll pass it over to the background checks team.
Thank you, Erin. And I'm so sorry. I just saw your message about kicking it off because you're on the move. So I apologize for that. And thank you to Erin for facilitating this and anybody else involved. And thank you all for coming and joining us. Typically, I'm the one, saying thank you for having me as a guest. But I feel like, nobody's really a guest. We're all in it together because we're all here for some purpose of, caring about the care for children and making sure it's quality and safe. And we all play a part of that and we're all in it together. But the background check piece of it is a big part of the work as a whole. And I know that there's a lot of information out there that we want to share with you. We can't cover it all. There's a lot, but we did try to put together something for you today that is hopefully informative. And you come away with more information and hopefully questions and answers time will give you the chance to answer the questions that you have that you've been wondering for a while. And we really want to promote more of these types of webinars that give people the information they're looking for and tell them, what's going on with the background check processes, because there's always changes that happen and we want you to be aware of them and get through them to get together. But my name is Meryl Stride. I guess I should have started with that. I'm the Provider Supports Administrator, and I oversee the background check programs amongst a few other programs within DCYF. I have a team here with me, so I'll let them introduce themselves before we get started, and I will start with Matt.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Matt Judge. I'm the administrator for the Federal Initiatives and Collaboration Unit in the Early Learning Division of Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And my role is also to be the Child Care and Development Fund Administrator for Washington State. There'll be more discussion of what that means, but just for context, some of the requirements that our state has around background checks really come from that Child Care and Development Fund grant and its federal rules. So a little more background on that is coming. I think Meryl will probably, and her team, the background check unit, will handle most of the content you'll see today, but I'll chime in occasionally to talk about sort of that federal rule context. And maybe, should I pass it to Mariah, Meryl?
Hello, I am Mariah Fabiani. I'm the background check manager. So I oversee the background checks, suitability assessment program, and certificate of parental improvement program. Go ahead, Anne.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Anne Lemieux, and I am the background check operations manager. And I oversee the 4 units who are specifically in charge of processing all background checks as it relates to individuals having unsupervised access to children, to include the early learning program. Thank you.
All right, thank you, team. And I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss anybody else that might have joined us from the team. But I think we are ready to get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, if you will bear with me one moment. And also just to let everybody know that this is being recorded, and the PowerPoint that we're going to share will be shared after the meeting with anybody who's interested. Can everybody see? Thumbs up. Thank you. All right, so starting with the boring intro slide, we are giving an overview of the DCYF early learning background check process. We have a great team who does the background checks. There's a lot of different pieces to it, but we tried to summarize everything to give you today to better understand the processes and the laws that drive it. And also, along the way, what we've tried to do to improve the processes and make things as easy as possible, but also safe and not neglecting that piece of it, but streamlining and, making sure that we're compliant, but also with the reality of the childcare, working in childcare and trying to get people in, the background check is required. So that's an important piece of it. And we really do try to every single day come up with ways to make the process kick off faster. So I'm going to start with kind of what drives the background check requirements. And those are there's some federal laws that require us to do the background check. They are safe to do them, and they give us a lot of information to ensure that we're hiring safe people to take care of our children. But there's also requirements that tell us that we need to do the background checks. And I put some federal laws and also the RCW, the Washington state law, and then the rule, the WAC associated with the background checks that we do for early learning childcare. I'm not going to click on all these links, but they're there and they'll be provided again if you want to go digging into them a little bit more. But here I just kind of put a summary from the CCDF public law in the criminal background check section, kind of laying out the requirements, policies, and procedure that require and conduct criminal background checks for childcare staff members. And that includes prospective childcare staff members of all licensed, regulated, or registered childcare providers, and all childcare providers eligible to deliver services for which assistance is provided under this part as described in paragraph A2 of this section. And over here, I just kind of put, in, easy terms to show who does that talk about for us. What does that mean for us? And that's early childhood education and assistance program, Head Start applicants, family, friends, and neighbors, child care center staff, volunteers, and in-home child care providers. Basically, anybody who's going to be working and providing early learning services would require this background check. I'll go to the next slide. And this continues the background checks requirement, and again, kind of summarizes things that, apply to humans, and we don't have to go through a bunch of different laws and interpreting WACs. But it applies to any new child care staff, applicants, or volunteer. This is regarding the changes from January 1st, starting January 1st, 2024. And it just kind of outlines, what do those changes mean? What do we need to do now? Who do the changes apply to? And what does that entail? And I also included a couple of other things in here just as FYIs of what, has been happening over the past couple of years to make the process better. But starting January 1st, 2024, any new childcare staff, applicants, or volunteers may be on the premises if they're not in licensed childcare space and not counted in the ratio, not interacting with children, and not unsupervised with children. This includes interviews, trainings, and hiring new staffs. And then any licensing application received by DCUF on or after January 1st, 2024 for childcare and early learning applicants, they must have an approved background check. So those kind of go hand in hand with each other of telling you, who is requiring the background check, and it goes into a little bit more detail in the first bullet point. And, over the years, again, we have made some changes to the background check processes and the requirements to maybe alleviate the number of background checks that are required or eliminate delays that may come from having to do background checks every 3 years, and now we're at 5 years. And that 2-year difference, it does make a difference, and not as many people are having to get them renewed as often. So, that's definitely an improvement. And as always, the early learning background check clearances are portable for early learning background check purposes, and we found that to be great. We do background checks for other purposes, for child welfare, for group care. And this is the only purpose that we have portability, which is great. that staff, once they're cleared and for an early learning purpose, they can use it for another one and they don't have to continue fingerprinting, which is something we're really trying to achieve in other areas of our work. So this is definitely an advantage. So here we're just giving kind of a timeline of the waivers that were submitted to the Office of Child Care. The requirements to do that full background check and allow staff to, work with that full background check requirement. That law has actually been in place for a long time. But over time, we've requested waivers to get some relief from that and allow prospective employees to, be on the roster prior to that full completion of that background check. So there's just gives everybody kind of an idea of the timeline and the waivers that have been submitted in 2018 through 2020. The Office of Child Care allowed a waiver for new staff from the new staff background check requirement. In 2019, DCYF submitted an issue letter to OCC regarding their requirements and requested relief. And then everybody knows about that thing called COVID that hit in around February 2020 through October 2021. ACF allowed COVID-19 waivers, which gave us some great relief as well. In September 2021, DCYF submitted an issue letter to OCC requesting relief again. When the COVID, all of those waivers that were starting to lift, we took action and requested an additional waiver to give us more time. In October 2021, OCC declined relief and directed that no waivers on background check requirements are allowed. So we did continue after that point, the existing policy for new staff because of the governor's proclamation and the state of emergency that was still happening in Washington. So we still, gave a little bit of leeway when it came to hiring new staff, despite the federal requirement. And then in July 2022, the state of emergency was rescinded and we continued to provide relief beyond that rescission. And then we had to put that stopping point on it until January 1st, 2024. So there have been, it's been quite a timeline of relief requested, relief provided, but now we're here and we have to move forward with being in compliance with the federal requirements. Matt, did you want to chime in?
I was just going to say there are several questions in chat and at least one person with their hand up. I'm wondering if we should talk about how we'd like to handle that.
Yeah, we can take a stopper here. And if I can, sharing my screen and then looking at the chat. Seems like it might be an impossible task, but hold on one sec.
Meryl, I did say in the chat that we would answer the questions at the end.
Okay, got it.
But if just because they're coming in quick, so.
Yeah, I think that would work, but I don't mind just taking a quick glance to see if there's anything specific that we could answer right now based on the slides.
Great.
Yes. Okay, I see a question from Sharon. Is childcare for religious institutions covered under any of these laws? That is not a question that I would be able to answer. Matt, any help on that, or where we should redirect that? There are some things we might not be able to answer during the meeting, but we'll definitely get the information out there if we have to do extra research.
Sorry, Meryl, I was scanning another question. Is that the one regarding volunteers? Was that what you were asking about?
It said, is childcare for religious institutions covered under any of these laws?
I will need to come back to answer that question categorically, but if the care is licensed, certainly, these background check requirements apply. Basically, if it falls under any of the categories in, I think the second slide that Meryl showed, then the full background check is required and these requirements, are applicable.
Got it. Thank you, Matt. And I'm making a note of the next question was, will we be sharing the language of paragraph A2 on this webinar? That this is the time when we come with a PowerPoint, I don't expect it to be perfect. So thank you for the questions. And that is one that I'm going to take a note of and I can update it to provide that information. And the next one is, if we have a volunteer that is here less than 4 hours a month, do they need a background check? What about a parent volunteer during a special event? I would say if a volunteer that's here less than 4 hours a month, do they need a background check? I mean, if they're going to be volunteering and they are on the roster working at a licensed facility or providing early learning services, then yes. If they're, could have unsupervised access, then I think that would fall under a category of needing a background check. Matt, do you disagree?
So the federal guidance on this says that if it's a volunteer that's not regularly, with kids, then we're not required necessarily to do a background check. The specific implementation on that depends on how background check unit rules apply.
Got it. Okay. So it wouldn't be, if it's not a federal requirement that they would need that background check, whatever is submitted to us when we run the background check, that's what we're going to process. So when we get it, we're assuming that whoever submitted it, they've done their homework as to what's required and when it's required. We're not, determining at that point if it's required. We just do the background check. So I think that it would depend on the circumstance, maybe how often. I don't know if the feds put kind of a set guidelines on as far as if somebody's working 2 hours a month versus 4 versus 6. I think it just depends on the situation. But again, the background check unit is not making that determination of based on what somebody's doing if a background check's required. And then if I had a granddaughter living with me for only 6 weeks, does she need a background check? Not volunteer helping with childcare. I think that's another one of those kind of considerations of how long is she going to be there, and if there's going to be unsupervised access, and what type of, is it in a licensed home? Is it in an FFN home? I would need a little bit more information from that. Is that DINAE? You don't mind?
Dina, it's
Yeah.
a licensed home daycare, and she's here temporarily in between her apartment, won't be ready for 6 weeks. So she's basically working 2 jobs. So she's in and out, but she will be here a total of 6 weeks. Not a volunteer and not helping with childcare, but I'm housing her for 6 weeks till her apartment's ready in a family home childcare.
Got it.
It might take 6 weeks to get that background check back. I don't know, but
That's what I'm thinking, that by the time you get the background check back, it might
be. Yeah. So I didn't know if I should start it or not start it. I mean, I can. And do I have to pay for that, or is there any funding for that?
The background check is actually free, so that's not a concern. When one is
Okay.
submitted to DCYF, it is paid for. But my thought is, if is there anybody that could speak to the licensing requirements here? If licensing, if they're, looking at a home to determine who's getting the right background check, if a situation like this would require a background check?
I can speak to it.
Thank you, Travis. So
Yeah, they need to talk with their licensor is what they need to do and figure that out with the time frame. And that's what I would tell them to do is talk to their licensor, figure out the time frame and see if it's necessary for them to do a background check. Because there could be other options.
right.
Okay, thank you.
Some are case by case basis, and those are the ones that kind of get tricky, but maybe there's a little bit of leniency in those situations, which is what we're looking for. Okay.
There's a question in chat from Julie Schroth regarding whether answers to these questions would be available at the Provider Support Subcommittee of ELAC that's happening on February 14. So we have confirmed that Office of Child Care can attend that session on background checks. And so we're going to do a survey of that group to see what questions they want to present to Region 10 ahead of time so that they can come prepared to answer those.
No, that'd be great. And I think that that's a good format and going through the questions and trying to be mindful of time. We can take these questions, anyone's from the chat, and then get the answers and provide them. Does that sound like a good plan? And maybe the presentation, hopefully it will answer some of the questions that come up, but we'll see. So I'll go back to that, and feel free, Mariah, Ann, or Matt, if you do spot any in the chat that you can just answer right away, that's fine too. Okay, so the next slide goes on to, and can you all still see my screen? Maybe, perfect, yay. Okay, I'll go with it anyway. So the background check developments that have taken place over the year, we kind of summarize it here. In October 2021, we started completing suitability assessments on early learning applicants instead of automatically disqualifying. That was a huge win and giving people opportunities and not just saying no or yes, but really looking at crimes that might be a safety concern, but also giving individuals a chance who have rehabilitated to work in childcare. Because we know that people can change, and not everybody, but we would still like to provide opportunities for the most qualified. In July 2022, DCYF, we started paying for all background check fees. And that didn't just provide that financial relief, it reduced the processing times because it took a while to process those payments. So those date and every day matters when it comes to getting a background check done. So that was a big win as well. July 2023, the background check renewal times increased from 3 to 5 years. And I spoke a little bit about that earlier.
Meryl, this is Susan. Can I just interject there? I just want people to understand that the times did not increase from 3 to 5. The federal law has always allowed 5 years. DCYF made the decision to follow the federal law. And I think it's important for people to understand that was, it's kind of misleading when you say you're increasing it, when really you're just matching what is already allowed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I could see how that would be taken. And I apologize if that was the intent that, but that
I just think we want to be clear about these things. The other thing I wanted to ask is, we all live and breathe this stuff every day, and we're suffering the consequences of the process. I'm curious, will you get to a place where you're going to tell us how you're going to fix the problem by other solutions besides just making us live with it? That's what I want. That's what I came for. I don't need to hear more about what we already know and what we do. I want to know how we're going to make it better.
Yeah, and that's great because we want to make it better too, of course. That's our goal. And these little points that I'm making about what we've done, and really thinking about what have we done in the past and how can we make it better. So while the feds, they had that 5-year requirement always, we've learned that that's the right way to go. So that, is us saying we're doing it wrong and we want to do it right.
Right, but remember, we have to walk the rules and live by the rules. So I just want you to just hear that and understand it. And we want solutions, and that's where we're trying to go. So these little steps that you're talking about are still impacting us in ways that are not super helpful. We need you to make bigger strides in solving these problems.
No, thank you for that. And I think that those types of things too, email them to me. And I want to know like what, any ideas, because the changes that we do make, they're the ones that are within our control. So basically we have the requirements, we know what we have to do. So what is within our control to change? And that's really where we're trying to do what we can, big and small. But we've learned that the small changes along the way, while it's not as out there for people to know about, it's not as shiny. But the small improvements that we do make that are within our control, they make a difference. They chip away at that turnaround time, which is huge, and that's in getting people in faster and hired faster. So our part is the background check unit. We know our part and our goal is to make improvements where we can in our processes, and anything that we can do to speed up the process, we're going to do it. But we also have the requirements that we have to go by, and we have to maintain compliance. So it's a balance that it's challenging to achieve, but we do what we can. Could we do better? Of course, I think anybody could always do better. But that's something we're constantly exploring. And we're not going to do things perfectly, but I do want y'all to know that we are really working at that every single day. It's not just a monthly thing or a quarterly thing. It's an every single day thing of what can we do better. But to go on as far as a few other things that we're trying for, we pre-filed a Senate bill 5774, and it's a bill to have fingerprinting services expanded to DCYF offices, and that would increase fingerprint appointment availability. It's one of those little things, if somebody's having trouble getting an appointment, hopefully we can get them into that appointment faster. And we proposed, actually, it was pretty bold, 48 offices across the state to provide those services, but that was, it was scaled down in a substitute bill. And now we're at 10 offices proposed. So that will hopefully, if it passes, that will provide some relief. And to me, if one person can get a fingerprint appointment faster, that's a win, because every little bit matters. And as I kind of touched on earlier, those small improvements that we make every day to try to make things run smoother and work smarter. It's updating our system reporting capabilities, streamlining our internal processes, and partnering with DSHS to reduce our turnaround times. Okay, so now I'm actually going to mix it up and pass it over to Anne Lemieux, our background check operations manager, to take over and talk about the background check components, just so you can get an idea of what is included on the background check result.
Hello again, everyone. As Meryl mentioned, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the components that are included within our background checks. The background checks that we do on individuals are extremely comprehensive. And one of the first things that we look at and we have access to is our own child welfare system, which includes a review of an individual's history as well as any founded findings that they may have for child abuse or neglect. And then also results provide us information regarding any founded findings an individual may have as it pertains to DSHS records, such as reports from Adult Protective Services. And then we also receive information from individuals through self-disclosures of either criminal or negative action history. And then we are also afforded information pertaining to conviction information from in-state criminal reporting databases and the Federal Bureau of Investigations when applicants are fingerprinted. And then we also obtain information regarding negative actions from DCYF, DSHS, and Department of Health. And that generally is regarding, say, an individual's license being revoked or denied. It could be a negative action pertaining to an individual's license to practice some type of service. And then we also look at sex offender registries, both national and state, for any states that individuals have reportedly lived in the last 5 years. And then we also look at obtaining records from any states that an individual has resided outside of Washington during the last 5 years for both their child abuse neglect databases as well as any interstate records that they may have that can be shared with us. And then we as Washington are part of the Western Identification Network. And what it is the shared network between 8 states to include Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, as I mentioned, Washington and Wyoming. And so that system affords us the opportunity to share information across those states. Now the next slide. And then when we get background check results, they come to us from the Background Check Central Unit, and our team turns around and processes the result to be able to either clear an applicant, if possible, within an hour of receiving the results from BCCU. And the majority of our applicants do have no record, or they don't have any crimes or negative actions that would show up on our secretary's list, and those are able to be cleared, which is reflected in merit, generally, like I said, within an hour of receiving the results from the Background Check Central Unit. If an applicant does not have a record or criminal or negative action history or anything that's equivalent on the secretary's list, those are cleared very quickly, as I mentioned. If an applicant has a federal disqualifying crime, we must disqualify those individuals, and they are notified through the appropriate process. However, if an applicant has a crime that requires an assessment of their character, suitability, or competence, those are referred to our suitability assessment unit. And those assessments are extremely thorough. They're individually based, they're strength-based. We gather as much information as we can through interviews with the applicant, review of records, as well as try to garner information regarding rehabilitative efforts that the individual has made. And Mariah will talk a little bit more about suitability assessments.
Thank you, Anne. And again, the reason we're providing all this information is so that you guys have it. And if you have any ideas, give them to us, throw them our way, and we can work from there.
Can we, those with raised hands, have a moment here? Brian definitely needs to speak, and Dinah does, and I'm confused as well, so.
Okay.
I think Dinah was first on it too, and I'd love to hear what she had to say first. I know she had her hand up raised first. Thank you.
Is that me, Dina?
Dina, I am so sorry. I said it wrong too.
That's okay. No, she answered my question. I thought I lowered my hand already, but I wasn't sure. But yes, I got my question answered. Thank you.
Okay.
And was it Susie next on that? Sorry, I don't mean to mitigate.
No, I love that you're taking charge. I think my question is, I think what I need to say is to reiterate what Susan's saying, is that we have this information. The information that we do not have is what are the big steps and what are the obstacles to making big steps to alleviate the problem, which is that we are unable to hire people, and you are keeping our businesses on the brink of being of imploding because we can't hire people in a timely manner. And the difference between all of the stuff that you guys have to do and what OSBI has to do, we know that. But I guess I'm wondering why you feel like this is helpful to us. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm like literally just sitting here thinking, we know all of this. This is our whole life. So what we don't know is what the conversation at DCYF, at OFM, with the legislature is about fixing this. And fixing it with small stuff is great. So most of the steps that you made are stuff that we actually outlined for you 3 years ago. So we're happy with that. That's awesome. I'm totally supportive of this bill. But like, what are the big steps you guys, what is your commitment to having this actually not be a problem in a imposition to the point that we can't hire people? That's the part I don't understand.
To start with well, when we created this presentation, it was more of a, all of the information of what we're doing, because we don't know if that everybody knows what we're doing. So the more that you have, the more you have an understanding of what the background check process looks like in general, and what we've done, on our part to change things and to improve them and to try to help speed up the process. So, and that's why, as a background check webinar, it was providing information regarding the background check process. And I know that we can't answer all of your questions or resolve all of the things that are the concerns that are happening with the background check process. But this was more of a trying to, understand the background check process. But it's also just a piece of a much bigger process. And what we're doing to try to do our part to speed up this part, if that makes sense. And I think that the meeting where we can discuss the bigger things, that's going to be the one that's coming in February. Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm on the right, or if I'm on the wrong track.
Well, I think the answer to this question depends on what we think the solution is. I know that from the federal level, that Office of Child Care thinks that it's an issue that's now in the hands of Congress in terms of if you ever wanted to change the federal requirement around new staff needing a completed background check. The other bit of flexibility that is in federal law that the state of Washington is not yet able to take advantage of is a section that allows an applicant to work under supervision if they have clearance on either the state fingerprint criminal background check or the federal fingerprint criminal background check, and is awaiting clearance on all the other elements. In Washington state, the way the system works, we're unable to separate out background check elements. And so being able to do that is, I would imagine, a couple of years and some significant investment of funds to make happen. So I'm just saying, in answer to that question, it depends on what you think the solution might be, but there aren't any quick fixes.
Thank you, Matt. And I think that's what we're trying to show you, where we are and can make those quick fixes with the background check process. That was our goal here, to present the information to you of what we're doing, all the many components of the background check that we have to cover, and that what we've done to try to improve that process and streamline and get things out to you faster. That is within our control. And so I did skip over to this other slide because we are getting very short on time. But before I get to that, I want to get to the hand raisers. Brian, if you want to throw your question out there, and thank you again for directing traffic a little bit earlier with the hand.
Hey, no worries. I know this is a lot. You're getting a lot of different angles on this, and I appreciate taking the time here. Brian Trimble, Executive Director of the Herzog Family Center in Spokane, Washington. So, Meryl, I did definitely hear what you said. Your your goal is to find any solutions here, looking for expedited ways of trying to get the fingerprinting process forward. Something I'm pushing legislatively right now is trying to get a mobile fingerprinting service, eliminate the idea of having these FTEs at the 10 locations. I think it's not going to be enough. I think we all know that that's a reality. My question really comes down to something that Colleen put into the statement over here. If DCYF is making the determination not to follow certain portions of the expectations of the federal requirements, aren't we still now out of compliance? I think that's really odd. It's a very tough spot to be in, where these are inconvenient to DCYF, but detrimental to the industry for the rules that they're saying what they will follow and what they're not. We are in an industry where we are required to follow those laws and expectations for lots of good reasons, for safety of children. It is odd that we're in this position now where DCYF is making a determination that what federal rules they will follow and what ones they won't. I do find this odd. Why don't we just choose to stay out of compliance like we are doing right now, technically, by not follow through completely? So if I could ask the question of Colleen, she seemed like the one that was put that question in there. I'd love to hear what she actually, to get clarification from that. That would be helpful.
Brian, are you asking for me to give more information, or did you want me to clarify something?
I wanted to fully understand what you were saying there, because when you raised that point that DCYF is not following all the rules in this situation,
yeah,
wouldn't that put us out of compliance? I think that's what you were trying to say, but I wanted to make sure, because then if that's the case, why follow some and not follow at all, or choose to do it what we've done always, is to make sure that they're supervised in the classroom. So sorry, thank you for answering, clarifying, if you don't mind, please. Thank you.
Yeah, that was the point I was trying to make. And I think because the slide that shared federal language didn't include that additional paragraph is what details that there are two different things that you can do before having a staff member on site supervised. And we could easily have access to one or the other of those components and do that before we supervise staff. In my opinion, it's even something that could be done redundantly and outside of DCYF. And I don't care if DCYF still does their entire process the way they need to do it, but providers could actually meet the federal requirements per those two pieces. So I will admit, I found it interesting and wondered whether or not it was intentional that language was not shared on this slide. And I'm not trying to point fingers, but that is actually the critical language that we should be looking at, because there are paths to move forward and to not cause so much harm to providers by looking at those pieces. And so I just wanted to highlight for everybody that, like, if you're a provider on here listening to this, know that there is language that you can access it and that you can see those things. And I think we can be pretty creative about some solutions moving forward. And the choices that DCYF has made do not come into full compliance with the federal government. So if we're saying that we have to come into full compliance, so we're not risking funding, DCYF is still choosing to not be fully compliant. And for me, it's an equity issue, because you have chosen to push the burden onto providers and have the most burdensome pieces of it come forward while still not actually meeting it fully. So if your stance is that we have to come in compliance with the Fed, then do it and be fully compliant with the Fed, or actually negotiate with us and put steps in place so that we can reasonably reach these goals. We want background checks. I cannot emphasize that enough. I want 100% of this, and I want it for all of my staff. I just want you guys to do it in a timely manner. And other states do this in 3 business days, no problem, on the regular. Why we haven't requested funding or done other things to remedy this issue that has been going on for a very, very long time is completely beyond me. We could take that $9 million that DCYF wants to have fingerprinting in their offices and have a new system to use. It's really getting frustrating, guys.
Well, Colleen, I appreciate what you're saying, and I don't want to contradict you, but I just want to be clear that this background check requirement for new staff is the last remaining major provision of non-compliance with CCDF requirements that DCYF has. And this is the only means we have of becoming compliant in the short term.
And I respect that, Matt, and personally respect you and the work that you have been doing on this stuff. But even in a conversation with Allison last week, it was her words that we are choosing to meet certain pieces and not, because the federal rule will state that those people shouldn't be on site, shouldn't be hired, all of those different things. That's the language you guys didn't share here today. And so there are things, and I recognize, and it was shared with us that like DCUF made those choices to be accommodating to providers, but that's not the piece that's hard for us. There's other pieces that need to be addressed and are much more critical. So, you know, I want to be clear that yes, I recognize we need to come in compliance with this, but we are not actually technically by the word of the rules coming into full compliance, because you guys are still permitting them to be on site in unlicensed places and be hired, which per the federal rule and the last time that we met about this, those were not things that you could do under the federal guidance.
Sorry, my silence is just to say, rather than argue back and forth about it, you make a fair point. I think there are some gray areas in specific implementation of this requirement where potentially we arguably could be out of compliance, but I think the focus here is the major headline about, you know, new staff background checks.
And Matt, that is the major component that's impacting us directly. And I think you guys appreciate that. Matt, you've done a ton of work. We've been working on this for 7 years. I know between you and me and everybody else. So this isn't like a surprise, but it's just, you can understand the frustration. Providers are asking the question. We've had a long time to work on this and it hasn't made any traction. So I understand everybody wants actionable things. I know all of your hands are tied too. We get that part where you're trying to do the best you can, but you're getting very little direction on how to go with it. So hopefully this pressure creates a new narrative. That's what I'm really hoping from all this, that the pressure to our legislation. We'll be in Olympia next week. Hopefully that we can help and have some conversations. We're trying to work with the DCUF in this. And so it is a collaborative approach. I do believe that we can resolve this, but I think the frustration people are out there is that it feels inaction. It feels like that because it's taken so long. And so I don't think anybody's coming out and saying it's one group's fault or another. It's just the reality of where we are. And it's a very uncomfortable place for businesses that are looking at solvency. And when we have that not being put as the narrative, if it was your need to make sure you paid for your mortgage and made sure your organization and your teachers were paid, I think your urgency would be wildly different. And I think if it meant whether or not you stayed in your occupation, it may be wildly different. I'd love that pressure on everybody that's making these decisions.
I think there's one other iPhone hand raised. I don't know who it is though. It could be a mistake. Okay, so I'll move on, and I apologize if none of this information was helpful. We really wanted to give folks an idea of what we're doing as part of, you know, our responsibility to get the process moving faster. There's little things because we are one piece of a much bigger operation. And we can't solve some of the bigger problems. Some things are outside of our control, but we're doing what we can to help speed up the process. And we're open to ideas from you. I've already seen in the chat, just from sharing the suitability assessment criteria we use, some questions about that and how are we eliminating bias. So those are the types of things we want to promote from these is how can we do things better in areas and not just speeding up the process, but our whole process. And so I like the open dialogue, and I appreciate all of you being transparent, and that's how we learn. And that's how we figure out what we can do better on the bigger scale and the smaller scale. But I did have some good news with the last slide is that we only have January 2024 to go by. That's 1 month. We're almost through the month, but it tells us something. And this slide right here, it has all of the, some of the data from starting in January 2023, where it shows as far as fingerprint background checks go, the fewest days of completion, meaning some of the background checks fingerprints only took 1 day to complete. And that means an applicant submitted their application, they fingerprinted, and 1 day later, their fingerprint results were back. The greatest days, for completion was 365. That's due to a number of factors. It could be lack of fingerprinting availability. It could be because somebody archived their application, decided not to apply, and then they came back later and then restarted the background check process. So that's a number of different variables. The average days for completion was 16, and that was January 2023. And as you go on, you see all of those average days, and they have been declining. The average turnaround time day, and right now in January, we are at 5 average days for completion, which is an improvement. And I'm hoping that that trend continues to go down. And, you know, we look at a lot of data. Data's not as boring as it seems. It tells us a story. So we want to see like what's happening and at what points in the process are things slowing down? And is it something that we can fix? Is it something that we can do better to get it moving faster? But I think the progress, it's not going to give us too much because we only have 1 month, but I feel like it's something. Are there any questions about the turnaround times?
Does that data include the turnaround time for out of state people or people who may have come from out of country?
Yes, it includes all applicants that completed the fingerprint check.
I think everybody on here is looking kind of at this chart with somewhat of disbelief. Do you have information on like how long it is to completion from the time that you submit a request for the portable background check through Merit? And we're having 10 days before you can even get an invite to schedule fingerprinting. And it seems like that is a time that is within DCYF's control, that is able to be impacted and affected by you all. But I look at this and like, this slide almost means nothing, like in our collective experience here.
We're working on with our IT team, and been kind of their go-to as far as getting our reports in order. And she could speak to more of what we're really trying to pinpoint. And that's pretty much everything from when we get the application to when it's submitted to DSHS, to when an applicant schedules an appointment, to when they actually go to the appointment, to when they, the fingerprints go through the WSP, FBI, DSHS, and when they come back to us and when we distribute the results. So a comprehensive time frame between each point of that process, how long it is taking. So IT is working on a report for that, and I think it's going to be available in February. So that way we can get all of that information and just take a look at it and see where things are taking the longest and where we can go from there to fix it if it's within our control, of course.
That would be really helpful, because I feel like when I look at this, this is something that the legislators get and they think, why are we complaining? I think this is it makes me feel like this is a very disingenuous chart. Like, this does not represent anybody on here's experience. So then we're at odds with you again, with DCYF. Like, we're not in agreement with your chart. That's a hard place to come from.
Right. Well, this is what we had. We wanted to show you something, but that's something that we noticed too. And that's why we reached out to our IT to get a report with everything. We want to see everything. And we want to be able, when we have meetings like this, hopefully the next one, we can have that available and we can show that and look at things at each point in time. Because it's much more than what this data shows, but this was the best that we had available right now.
Is there an obstacle in the process that as soon as you apply for the portable background check, it initiates your ability to schedule fingerprinting? I saw that someone in the comments said that they had gotten it the same day. That's certainly not been our experience, and we've contacted the fingerprinting folks, and they said they can't schedule us until they receive this invite from DCYF. And is there a reason why that's not triggered immediately?
Most of them should be coming through same day. So when an applicant submits the application, and please, if you could please jump in and kind of explain how that works.
Yeah, you bet. So early learning applicants submit a portable background check through Merit. And once that submit button is clicked, it automatically relays over to our portable background check system. And if those come in Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, those are processed within an hour of them being received. And at that point, a fingerprint appointment notice is automatically generated and emailed out to the applicant. So if people are saying that it's taking 10 days for them to get the notice, I would definitely like to hear about that and figure out why that's happening so we can hopefully troubleshoot that. But yes, as soon as those applications come into our system, within an hour of that time, we are pushing those forward to have a fingerprint notice automatically generated and sent to applicants. I do know that there has been some issue with the emails coming from our system and landing in, say, a spam folder. And unfortunately, we did try to troubleshoot that on our side, and we were advised that it's not something that we have control over. It's something that has to do with the email provider that the applicant may be using, and therefore they would have to put our dcyf.backgroundcheck@dcyf.wa.gov email into their accepted email, list in order to receive those in their inbox as opposed to their spam. Did that kind of answer that question about the notices coming out timely?
Kind of. I think that everyone, or a lot of people here, we have a varied experience with that. And so without that, that kind of tech support to show that information, it's hard to say, but I know we are definitely not getting it same day. We are walking people through, sitting through it with them, and it is still taking multiple days before even an invitation to schedule an appointment comes up. So we'll start sending you all emails every time we have that.
Sure.
No, that would be great, Casey. If you could send them to Anne and copy me and Maria. We want to look into these things, these little things that are happening that we don't know about until we know about them. And those are the little fixes that shouldn't be happening. And hopefully we can fix it. And that goes for others too. If you run into situations where things are taking a really long time, reach out to us, and we want to look and make sure that it's not something that we're doing on our end, because our staff, the expectation and the majority of background checks that go through them, as soon as they get a submission or a result, it's processed within an hour. So that's what we aim for. And if that's not happening, we definitely want to fix it. So on the last slide is our contact info. And this is the main one up here. That's just mainly for background check questions or status checks, but our contact info is here as well. And we do want to help. We want to hear. I'm actually kind of excited to look at all of this chat. I want to see what everybody's saying and asking, and hoping that we can get to it and produce something to answer your questions. I don't know who I would send that to. Is that you, Erin, who could get it to others?
Yeah, Meryl, we can connect on getting follow-up for the chat. If it works out to happen in time for the next provider supports meeting, I think with those meeting materials would be a good place to track and follow up, and we can send that out to the whole group.
Definitely. Thank you, Erin. Okay. Well, thank you everybody again for joining us, and I hope somebody got something from the information we provided. I see a few things in there asking about it, and anyone who's interested, you can go through the PowerPoint and feedback on making it better. I know that the topics that we covered aren't necessarily for the season that's going on right now, but we want you to know what we're doing. That's full transparency about how the process works, everything we're looking at, and what we're working on to make things better. So that was our goal here today. And again, we'll look at all of the chat information, but we don't want to limit it to that. Again, reach out to us if you have other feedback or questions, because I know that we're not going to get all of this covered in an hour. Anything else anybody wanted to add? Okay, somebody else might have to end the meeting because I could sit here all day and we could talk. Who volunteers?
Well, I can close us out. Like I mentioned, there is a provider support subcommittee meeting on February 14th. Looks like Julie dropped the information for that in the chat. So we definitely welcome anyone to join that meeting. There will be a representative from Region 10 in attendance, so somebody will be able to speak to the federal side of things. That presentation is at 11 o'clock, and we welcome the public to attend. And similarly, we will be tracking the questions in the chat and providing follow-up via the provider support subcommittee as well. And we will also send out an email shortly by tomorrow, I'm guessing, with the recording of this meeting for a quick follow-up. And of course, anybody can feel free to reach out to us in the meantime if you have any questions. But thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, guys.